Let me start by welcoming you all. We have an extraordinary group of people assembled here to talk about something we don't often talk about, which is what is the solution and what is the action we're going to take about probably the most existential problem that we have facing us. Delighted Prime Minister Gaston Brown is here because the latest storm, Irma, in the Caribbean, devastated part of his country totally. Mr. De Niro is working with the Prime Minister to address those issues. But there are so many dimensions of this problem, and as Dr. Thani showed us in a very explicit way, the impacts of climate are truly horrifying as we look into the future. And unless we are organized as a community to do something about it today, we are going to have exponentially more difficult problems to solve in the future. So thank you, Dr. Thani, for that illustration. But I'm really delighted that today we have the opportunity to focus on some of the specifics, and in particular, the role of women and youth in this climate problematic that we see ahead of us. We know that when climate change meets with natural disaster, women and children are often the first to be hit and the last to be helped. By the most basic health indicators in emergency situations, women and children have higher death tolls and lower recovery rates than men. And they are 14 times more likely as women to die from climate-related disasters as men. In terms of post-crisis opportunity, girls in humanitarian situations, we find, are 2.5 times more likely to be disadvantaged, especially in terms of admittance to schools. Traditional gender roles explain some of this disparity because women put themselves at risk in many of these situations by safeguarding children and parents during disasters. They often have to wait for a male to give them permission to evacuate or seek help from male humanitarian workers, which is difficult in some settings. And furthermore, there remains a myth that women and youth are somehow weak in these situations. And while it's true that women and youth are often victimized, the evidence from humanitarian situations to agency and NGO boards shows that resoundingly women and youth know their needs and know how to meet them, and it's time for us to listen to them. It's a stark fact also that our global society is going to have to face issues like climate change that are worsening. We will see more, not fewer, climate-related disasters, and these are going to be more dramatic in the scale of destruction that we'll witness. If the status quo persists as we see it today, we will see a significant increase in the number of women and children whose lives and opportunities are cut short by climate-linked disasters. So the question for us is, how do we break this trend? How do we empower women and youth to forge the solutions for minimizing the impact of climate-linked disasters? And we're fortunate to have two extraordinary people with us who are going to give us the answer to all of these questions. No pressure. First of all, Her Excellency Essa Buhumaid is the UAE's Minister of Community Development. Her Excellency at the helm of the UAE's efforts to promote family cohesion and community, and is actively involved in the development of the UAE. Welcome, Your Excellency. We also have a gentleman here with us who some of you may know, Mr. Forrest Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker is not only an Academy Award-winning actor, an acclaimed director, but he is a powerful voice on peace and youth engagement as UNESCO's Special Envoy of the Whitaker and founder of the Whitaker Peace and Development Institution, and we were just talking about some of his work with different communities, empowering communities, and we're really looking forward to hearing you, Mr. Whitaker, on these issues. But let me start with Minister Buhumaid. Minister, why should governments and donors increase their focus on women and youth in the climate and humanitarian fields? What is the compulsion to do that, in your view?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, as we say, and as we start, thank you very much, Mr. Director General. To start with, let me just quickly clarify a point. When we say women and children, we somehow tend to group them together. Now, we prefer in the United Arab Emirates to somehow differentiate, because women has their own requirements, has their own agenda as well, and children the same. If we tend to group them together in a way to show that they are the weakest link, we somehow don't agree on that at all. So I wanted to start by clarifying this specific topic. We believe that if you actually empower a woman, you empower a whole nation. We believe in the United Arab Emirates that an educated, very powerful woman can actually not only help herself, but can actually make sure that the full community is on board on whatever plan. Being said that, not because I'm a woman myself, but because that's the reality that we live in the United Arab Emirates. So we also believe that a woman who's well educated, who is well prepared for whatever action this life can throw at her, whether they are at a good time or at a bad time, she is more powered, she's more powerful to take the right decisions. So if we invest in women at the very right time, when the things are actually working on smoothly, when everything is okay, we're not talking about any crisis time, when we're talking about the normal day-to-day, if this woman is empowered, has the full rights, understand exactly how to act, she will be able to make better decisions when the time arrives. God forbid in crisis, God forbid if there's something that everyone will have to collectively work together to ensure that the whole community is saved. So to start with, as we said, women and children have a link, but the link between them is strong. We actually totally believe that women comes first, and then if she is at a better position, the whole community will be at a better position, and so are the children.
Thank you very much, and I think going to your point, just looking at the audience, I can see a number of women who are driving extraordinary change in the UAE as leaders. And the UAE is a living example that the empowerment of women actually results in quite dramatic changes in different ways than we would expect normally. So I think there's a lot of weight of evidence behind what you're saying. But so let me turn to Mr. Whitaker. We were talking a little bit, Mr. Whitaker, about the work that you have been doing with dispossessed people in different settings, especially in Africa. The fact that there is a tendency to view women and youth as victims rather than as agents of change in their own right. This is an implicit disempowerment of youth in crisis situations that we see happening. From your experience and your work in humanitarian situations, how do you see that this dynamic can be broken and changed for a positive future?
I mean, for myself, I mean, we work in areas of conflict by empowering youth to be able to be conflict mediators as well as social entrepreneurs in their environment. In that case, we're working in South Sudan in the current civil war, in Uganda in post-conflict, in Mexico in like urban conflict, in the United States in racial and gang-related conflicts, and South Africa in apartheid conflicts. And so as a result, I have had this opportunity to be able to look at different youths and their positions in the community. And there's been a sort of a consensus across that people are looking at them as a part of the problem, not as a part of the solution. They're looking at them as perpetrators or as victims of violence, which causes problems still for the state. And so the question is, when you have 52% of the population being youths, and you have, like, in areas of conflict, which we work, about 70% of the people are under the age of 30 years old, then you have to look at them and recognize that you have to create certain partnerships with them if you want to effectuate any form of change to be able to happen within that community. The modalities and stuff, the things that we've tried to do have been centered around bringing the youths together and giving them tools. So create a cadre of youths, pull them together, train them in conflict resolution, ICT, or computer technologies, life skills, and in financial inclusion or social entrepreneurship. And then you send them back out into the community and let them train the youths there, and start to begin social businesses inside of those communities of which we fund. So this is the purpose that they've chosen, because some of the problems that occurred originally were because of lack or loss of identity, loss of ability to feel like they can make an effectuated change. So when they've come back into the communities and they've started to do these things, then they start to actualize their own ideas of what's going on, what they need to fix within their communities. And so what I've found, what's been really amazing, is that after they've been given these tools, like take for instance in Mexico, during the earthquake, the youths like mobilize themselves to go and give people food, water, shelter, move and mobilize them. In the South Sudan, where we work extensively, there was a militia that moved into a school. Our youths went out on their own without anything of us guiding them, negotiated with that militia to leave that school, and were able to put the students back inside of that school. And at the same time, I've seen other youths that have been battling with this, and they're great entrepreneurs on their own, and then they've decided, you know, they see a tribe that's in conflict, and they've decided to put their monies there and help negotiate or bring together through football matches or whatever it might be, a dialogue that will open up the possibilities of peace. And so what you see is that if given the tools, if given the opportunity, if given the identity and purpose, then those youths will effectuate great changes. Great changes. I'm only giving you a few small, tiny examples, but there's so many. And outside of our group, there's so many.
I think both of you make a very powerful point that empowerment leads to very positive change. Disempowerment leads to disintegration. Just to follow up on that, Mr. Whitaker, you've had a lot of experience both in Los Angeles and in Africa. I assume that there are some similarities also. But what do you think is the learning moment from this? How do you think we can capture the learning that you have had in these experiences and institutionalize that? We have managers of international organizations here dealing with those issues. How do we capture that learning that you have and institutionalize it into the way that we deal with the crisis and post-crisis recovery?
I think that we still have to remember that one sort of adage of making partners out of the youth. I think the governments themselves have to not only create programs and policies, but they also have to be facilitators for the youth to be able to actually move forward their ideas. I think in the case of climate change, you have issues of the government or private sector or whomever people about what's actually occurring, and then actually futurize it so that they can look at what's going to happen if they don't step in and do something. Then they have to give some causality, they have to give some way of dealing with the issues, solutions that they've found. And then I believe, really importantly, to create actionable things that people can feel like they want to do, because the youth need to feel that they can actually do something that actually effectuates a change. And so if I were to use the same model that I was just talking about, which is the model of creating a core, you would need to create an environmental core of youths that would be trained in vocational work and trained in like the knowledge of what's necessary to be able to move us forward, or change the needle for the environment. Send them back into the communities, let them spread this knowledge of actionable things, and then create with the government, with private sector, jobs and things of that nature that will be able to be utilized to aid us in this current environment to change the problems with climate change. And I can say that for sure I've seen this occur, because with the youth that we've trained, like in Mexico, I saw a group called Cultivarte, and this group, they were changed in environmental justice, and they went out to the communities and they started to train the children and young adults in different actionable things that they could do. And at the same time, another group went in and started urban farming, which deals with the greenhouse effect, but also deals with food security. And then that was in Tijuana. In Chiapas, I was able to see youths go in and start farming on a large scale to feed 250 families, again, dealing with this issue of needing to put more greens onto the planet, and then as well, giving like food and sustenance to people. So it's possible to do it in that frame if you take that frame back and you actually deeply train them in what's necessary for the environment. This group will will activate themselves because they activated themselves on those causes on their own. We did not require them or ask them to do so. Those are extra projects that they did to help ensure that their environment was clean and that they would continue their lives.
Yeah. Very, very instructive lessons. And from our perspective, my agency's role is to help governments to move to a clean energy future based on renewable energy. And we found...
If I may add on the empowerment part,
yes, please.
Mr. Director General, with the empowerment part, adding on Mr. Foster's talk, we've witnessed that right in front of our own eyes here in the United Arab Emirates. Massive changes can happen the minute you empower this individual. Now, today we're talking about women, youth, and children. But let me give you an example. We've witnessed that with startups, small startups, and now I'm talking specifically about women. There was this nationwide program that we've launched a couple of years ago. And what we've noticed is, so this entrepreneurial woman, or lady, let's say, have started this business, and a few years' time down the line, when we continue go back and to check them, we support them with training, we support them with the best infrastructure possible, and to ensure that they actually sustain this work and help themselves and their families economically and socially. So 3-4 years down the line, what happens is this woman automatically will have a second member of the family involved in this small business. So whether it's a husband, whether it's a sister, it's a mother as well, or a daughter or a son. So there you see that there is a replica effect, and it's a multiplying effect where you empower one person and then the whole community somehow starts empowering by themselves. Now we've got more than 2,000 of these small startups, which we call them micro. Of course, 2,000 might sound as a very small number to others, but for us it's a huge success to see that they are fully financially stable and actually thinking of growing their businesses outside the United Arab Emirates as well.
That's very interesting, and actually living in the UAE, I've been very impressed by the approach you're taking, in particular, how you empower youth and the multiplier dividends that come from that. You have ministers who are 23 years old in the UAE. I don't think...
with us in the room as well.
I don't think there's anywhere else that we see something like this. And the impact of that actually is quite tremendous in terms of not only empowering the youth, but affecting change, and affecting change in a new setting and a new environment. Good, so the example I was talking about, empowerment in very disadvantaged areas in Africa where we've been working on energy access, we found that one of the most effective ways of dealing with this was to create entrepreneurship programs, not aid, but entrepreneurship programs with women, who we would train in the basic skills for handling solar photovoltaics, and they would become engineers in the community and businesswomen who were providing solutions to others. So that gave it a momentum and a continuity. So last point, Mr. Whitaker, to you. How do we maintain this continuity? How do we prepare ourselves for a future in which we're going to see more disruptive events, more potential conflicts, driven by conflicts even over natural resources, in post-conflict and disaster scenarios? How do we equip ourselves to systematically address these issues in the future?
I mean, on an abstract level, I mean, I think, one, we have to create movements. I'm talking more from the grassroots level, bottom-up level. I mean, the top-down level is still very important. I mean, obviously it's really important. But I'm talking about the masses, because the masses have to do behavioral changes in order to be able to make the climate change actually work. And so, for me, you have to give the opportunity for youth and others to be able to do actionable things that make a change. And then you have to, I would hope, just that you would be able to start to whiteboard, you start to do town hall meetings, start to gather people and individuals to get ideas and stuff as to how the movement can be moved into the people, how the movement can start amongst the people. I mean, there's been like a number of different movements that have happened already. I mean, in Kenya, Wangari did like this amazing thing with the Greenbelt movement. I mean, there was thousands of trees planted, a philosophy of being able to plant a tree, building the seeds of peace. That was her thing. She won the prize for that. And I think the same thing happened in India, you know, after the Accord, and like 1.5 million people planted 66 million trees in 12 hours. This tells you that it's possible, and you just have to create the access for people to be able to grab a hold of the movement and know that, you know, this has to be done. I'm a part of it. I can make a change and a difference, because that's what they need to know, that what they do affects something. And once they realize that what they're doing affects something, then they can spread their tentacles of, like, whether that's through social media, whatever it is, whether it's walking from door to door. Movements are of all different types. And I think that we have to create many different movements by encouraging the youth and others to address this situation and to recognize what they need to have a real future.
That's a great point. And I'm from Kenya, so Wangari is my countrywoman, and I can tell you the trees she planted are still there. She is gone, she has left us, but her trees are there, and we remember her every day. I think those are great messages. Minister, in terms of moving forward, are there lessons from the UAE that we can learn? Because you've been very successful in this engagement.
I would humbly say there is plenty of stories to be told. I think we're not giving all these stories out. We really need to actually highlight. There's a lot of success stories, just to mention some of them, that I mean, we've got more than 66% of our workforce, for example, in the federal government is by women. And not only that, let's focus about this 66%. There is more than 15% among them in higher positions. So it's not only the workforce is not only women, but we are actually empowered women. Our cabinet, there's more than 30% of our cabinet members happen to be women. The same things happen, occurs to the National Council, which 20% of the members are women, and the numbers are growing further and further. Not only that, the stories that can be benefited or learned from the United Arab Emirates story can actually cover a lot of the full spectrum. Youth is a huge success in the United Arab Emirates. It have already been there, started long time, but we've witnessed this movement, and my colleague, Her Excellency Shamma Al-Mazrou'i, the youth minister, is a better person to actually explain that in details, but to quickly highlight, we've noticed and we've seen the amount of efforts that the youth have contributed back to the community and to the full country by only giving them a chance, by only opening a door, by only listening to them. So what they've started is those youth circles all around the country, and not only, locally in the United Arab Emirates. They've spread those youth circles, which is a hub, an open door to sit, discuss, and take topics further and further, regionally and internationally. So what that made is it gave a full new movement toward hope, towards your voice as a youth is heard. And from there, a lot of opportunities are actually growing. Now, what we're trying to do, again, to bridge the gap, most importantly, to ensure that our communities are very strong and cohesive. We're bridging the gap now between youth and our seniors, our elderly. Because our seniors and elderly are people who we look to them, we look up to them as our consultants in the government, wherever it is. And bridging the gap between youth and the elderly is something very important. We're just experimenting right now, and we will be talking about that further during the summit as well. But we're very excited to see how this new movement will ensure the cohesiveness of the whole community. Now, this is very strong for a reason. If you have a strong community, at a good day, you can easily ensure that at a time of a crisis, when something is needed, the full community will be there. Talking and tapping on humanitarian movements as well. We have just heard Her Royal Highness, Princess Haya bint al-Hussein, announcing a great achievement and a great movement towards an international benchmark, I think that would happen. The announcement a few minutes ago in the main hall room is a hope and a promising hope for everyone around the world at a time of crisis. By ensuring this data bank of information about the people in need will ensure that at a time of a crisis or when strong work is required, the whole community, the whole world will be able to move forward at a most efficient and effective way, and most importantly, to ensure that the right people in need gets it. They get the need at the right time, and they get the right need for them as well. So that's in a nutshell. But I mean, if the time allows, there's plenty and plenty and plenty of more successes stories. Of course, we use that by ensuring that the DNA of the United Arab Emirates is somehow designed around that through culture, of course. And we happen to have our Minister of Culture among us as well here. So this session is very lucky. It made my time much easier, actually.
Well, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Unfortunately, we don't have more time,
there you go.
But I think we can conclude on the very inspiring examples that you've shared with us. I'd like to thank you both. I think really the bywords that have come out of this is that we cannot afford to marginalize more than half our population because of the nature of the threats we face. They need to be empowered. And I think, Forrest, I love the way you talk about a movement, that we need a movement. And I think that the scale of threat that we face is such a big challenge that a movement, a global movement, is precisely what we need to address these challenges. So let me thank you both very much, and thank you for sharing your thoughts.